The woman didn't recognize me. She was standing near the appetizer table in a floor-length navy dress, pearls at her throat, champagne flute in her right hand, and she was smiling at me. That practiced church social smile I'd watched her use my entire childhood. The one that said, "I am a good person, and I need you to know that. Are you enjoying the evening?" she asked. I looked at her for exactly 3 seconds before I answered. "Very much," I said. "It's a beautiful venue." She nodded, pleased. We made small talk for maybe 4 minutes. She told me her name was Patricia. She told me her husband was on the city council. She told me she did a lot of work with youth outreach programs, at-risk girls mostly, and that it was her calling. I held my glass steady. I smiled back. She had no idea she was talking to her daughter. "My name is Noelle Carpenter. I'm 27 years old. I run a financial consulting firm in Charleston, South Carolina with 11 employees, 2 office locations, and a client list that includes 3 regional hospital networks and a logistics company that operates in 4 states. I was not always this person. 10 years ago, I was a 17-year-old girl standing on a porch in Harwick, Georgia, a town of about 6,000 people, 1 stoplight, and a church on every corner. Watching my mother zip up a rolling suitcase and set it outside the front door. She didn't throw it at me. She didn't scream. That's the part people don't expect. She was perfectly calm. "You've made your choice," she said. "We've made ours." Then she went back inside, and my father locked the door. I need to back up because if I start there with the suitcase, you won't understand what came before it. And what came before it matters because this story isn't just about what my parents did to me. It's about what they thought that would do to me. I grew up in a strict evangelical household. My father, Gerald Carpenter, was a deacon at Harwick First Baptist. My mother, Patricia, ran the women's ministry and volunteered at every school function, every bake sale, every charity drive. From the outside, we were the picture of a solid Christian family. Inside, the rules were different. Grace was conditional. Love came with asterisks. You were good as long as you behaved. And the moment you didn't, you were a problem to be managed, not a person to be helped. I was a straight A student. Honor roll every semester since 6th grade. I'd already been accepted into a pre-business program at Georgia State on a partial academic scholarship. I played piano at Sunday services. I tutored younger kids at the library on Thursdays. I was, by every visible measure, exactly what they'd raised me to be. Then I was 17, and it was April, and I took a pregnancy test in the second floor bathroom at 6:47 in the morning, and everything I had built, everything I was in their eyes, evaporated in about 90 seconds. I told my mother first. I thought that was the right move. She was in the kitchen making coffee. I came downstairs in my school uniform, sat at the table, and told her quietly the way you tell someone something true that you're terrified of. I didn't cry. I was too scared to cry. She set down her mug. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask who or when or whether I needed a doctor. The first thing she said was, "What will people think?" I went cold. Not metaphorically. I actually felt it move through me, that specific chill that happens when someone shows you in one sentence exactly where you rank in their world. My father came home at 5:30 that evening. I don't know what she told him. I wasn't in the room. But when he came to find me, his face was the face of a man handling a situation, not a father looking at his child. "You have a week," he said. "Figure out where you're going." That was the entire conversation. I was 17 years old, 10 weeks pregnant, and my father gave me a week, like I was a tenant behind on rent. I spent that week in a fog. I called the only person I thought might help. My Aunt Renee, my mother's younger sister, who lived 2 towns over. She didn't answer. I found out later my mother had already called her first. I tried to talk to my parents twice more. Both times my mother said she was praying for me, and my father said there was nothing more to discuss. On the 8th day, I came downstairs and my suitcase was already on the porch. I hadn't packed it. She had. And she'd packed it the way you'd pack a stranger's bag, efficiently, with no sentiment. My clothes, my toiletries, my school ID. She'd left out my piano books. She'd left out every photo from my room. She'd left out the journal I'd kept since I was 12. I stood on that porch for a long time. I was wearing a yellow cardigan. It was 58 degrees. I remember both of those things with complete clarity. Then I picked up the suitcase and I walked. I had $214 in a savings account, a prepaid debit card with $40 on it, and a phone that my parents cut service to before I reached the end of the street. No car, no plan, no one who had said, "Come here." I walked 3 miles to the county library because it was the only place I knew that had free Wi Fi and didn't require you to be anything in particular to walk through the door. I sat at one of the computers for 4 hours that first day, researching shelters, emancipation laws in Georgia, prenatal resources for minors. I was terrified, but I was also doing something that I didn't have a name for yet. I was building. I found a shelter, the Harwick Women's Resource Center on Oleander Street. I walked there before it got dark. I told the intake coordinator, a woman named Miss Darlene, that I was 17, pregnant, and had been asked to leave my home. She handed me a form. She handed me a cup of hot tea. She said, "You're in the right place. I signed the intake form at 4:52 p.m. on April 19th, 2015. I kept a copy of it. I've kept a copy of everything since that day. That was the moment I knew. Even then, at 17, terrified and barely holding together, that documentation was the only power I had left. I wasn't passive. I was building. I just didn't know yet what exactly I was building toward. Survival has a sound. It's not dramatic. It's not a movie montage with swelling music and a determined face staring at a horizon. It's the sound of a shelter curfew buzzer at 9 p.m. It's the sound of a shared bathroom with 6 other women and one working shower. It's the sound of yourself crying quietly into a pillow so the woman in the next cot doesn't hear you and because she has her own problems and your grief is not the most urgent thing in this room. That was my life for the first 11 weeks after the porch. I stayed at the Harwick Women's Resource Center through May. Miss Darlene, Darlene Hutchins, she let me use her full name later when I needed a character reference. She was the one who connected me to a social worker named Pam Okoye at Franklin County Family Services. Pam was sharp, efficient, and completely unsentimental in the best possible way. She didn't feel sorry for me. She just solved problems. By June, Pam had helped me apply for emergency Medicaid, WIC enrollment, and a temporary housing voucher through a state program for pregnant minors. I was moved into a transitional housing unit on Sycamore Drive, a small apartment shared with one other girl, Tanisha, who was 19 and already had a 10-month-old. The apartment smelled like old carpet and pine sol. The kitchen window didn't close all the way. There was a roach problem in the cabinet under the sink. It was the first place in my life I'd ever felt completely free. I gave birth to my daughter on November 3rd, 2015, at Harwick Regional Medical Center. Her name is Eden. She weighed 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She had my nose and a full head of dark hair, and she screamed immediately, loudly, without hesitation, like she was already announcing herself to the world. I was 18 years old, alone in a delivery room except for a nurse named Carol who held my hand during the last 40 minutes because I had asked her to, and she said yes without any hesitation at all. There was no family in the waiting room. I had called my mother 3 weeks before the due date, not to reconcile. I wasn't there yet. Maybe I'd never be there, but because I thought she deserved to know her grandchild was coming. Some instinct I hadn't burned out yet. She picked up on the second ring. I told her the due date. I told her the hospital. There was a pause. Then she said, "Noelle, we've moved on. I think you should too." She hung up. She hung. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Then I put it face down on the table and went back to folding baby onesies. I finished my GED in March 2016, 4 months after Eden was born. I took the test at the Franklin County Adult Education Center on a Tuesday morning, left Eden with Tanisha for 3 hours, and passed all 4 sections on the first attempt. That fall, I enrolled in a 2-year business administration program at Georgia Piedmont Technical College. It took me 3 years instead of 2 because I was working. Cleaning offices at night for a company called Spark Clean Services, $13.40 an hour, 3 nights a week, plus weekend shifts at a diner called Lola's on Route 9 where the tips were inconsistent. But the cook, a man named Howard, always set aside a plate for me before close. Eden went to a subsidized daycare on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On the other days, Tanisha and I traded off. Every dollar I made, I tracked in a notebook. Not because I was naturally disciplined, I wasn't, not then, but because I was scared. Scared of slipping, scared of needing someone and having no one, scared of my daughter ever standing on a porch with a suitcase she didn't pack herself. So, I wrote everything down: income, expenses, balances, goals, column by column, week by week. That notebook was the beginning of everything I would later become professionally. I just didn't know it yet. In 2018, I transferred to Georgia State, the same school I'd been accepted to at 17 before everything fell apart. Different circumstances now. Pell Grant, two small scholarships, a part-time bookkeeping job I'd gotten because my community college professor, Dr. Anita Reeves, had recommended me to a firm downtown. Dr. Reeves was the first person who looked at my numbers, my actual work, the spreadsheets, the analyses, and said, "You have a real mind for this. Not good job, not keep it up. A real mind for this." I held onto that sentence like it was a life raft. I graduated from Georgia State in May 2020 with a degree in finance, a 3.91 GPA, and Eden, 4 years old by then, sitting in the bleachers in a yellow dress, waving a little flag that said, "Go Mommy" in red marker. Tanisha brought her. Tanisha drove 2 hours to be there. My parents were not. Here's the part where I tell you about the lie. I found out about it by accident, the way most devastating things reveal themselves. Not through a dramatic confrontation, but through a casual comment that was never supposed to reach me. It was the summer of 2019. I'd reconnected carefully, quietly with one cousin, my father's niece Maya, who was a few years older than me, and had always been kind without making a production of it. We'd started texting occasionally, nothing heavy, memes mostly, small updates. One evening, she called me instead of texting, which was unusual. Her voice was strange, careful, like she was carrying something breakable. "I have to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to know I just found out myself." She told me that for years, my parents had been telling the family that I had suffered a mental breakdown at 17, that I had become unstable, that they had tried to get me help, but I had run away in the night and refused all contact, that they had filed a missing persons report, which turned out to be technically true. They had filed one, though it was withdrawn when the shelter confirmed I was there voluntarily, that they had no idea where I was. They had been telling this story at every family gathering, every holiday, every church event for 4 years. My stomach dropped. Not because they'd cut me off, I had grieved that already. Not because they'd lied. Somewhere, I think I'd suspected something. Because of the craftsmanship of it. The detail. The missing persons report as a paper shield. The mental breakdown narrative that made me unsympathetic and them long-suffering. The years of repetition that had calcified the lie into something the whole family had simply accepted as history. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had rewritten me. "Maya," I said, "did anyone ever try to find me?" Silence. "My grandmother," she said finally. "Grandma Ruth asked about you. A lot, especially near the end." I felt something move in my chest. Grandma Ruth, Ruth Carpenter, my father's mother, had been the one soft place in that family. A small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with white hair she kept pinned back and reading glasses she was always losing. She used to slip me $20 bills folded into little squares and tell me I was going to do something that mattered. Near the end, I said, Maya went quiet again. "She passed in January," she said. "I'm sorry, Noelle. I thought you knew." I hadn't known. My grandmother had died 7 months earlier and no one had told me. "Maya," I said very carefully, "was there a will?" The pause that followed was 4 seconds long. I counted. "There was," she said, "but your parents told the executor you were unreachable." I stayed very still. Unreachable. That word. I had a listed phone number, a registered address, a Georgia State student ID with a current enrollment date. I had a social worker on record, a Medicaid file, a daycare registration, a paper trail of my entire existence going back to that shelter intake form on April 19th, 2015. I was the opposite of unreachable, and my parents knew exactly where I was because my mother had picked up the phone 3 years before and told me to move on. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just abandonment anymore. This was something else entirely. I didn't call my parents that night. I didn't send a message. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. I opened my laptop and I started searching for estate attorneys in Franklin County, Georgia. I found one at 11:43 p.m. Her name was Caroline Osei. Her firm's website said she specialized in contested estates and civil fraud. Her client reviews said she was methodical, relentless, and had never lost a probate case. I wrote down her number in my notebook, the same one I'd been using since the transitional apartment on Sycamore Drive, and I underlined it twice. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was ready. Caroline Osei's office was on the third floor of a building on Peachtree Center Avenue in Atlanta. Small, deliberately understated. The kind of office that doesn't need to impress you because the work does that. She was maybe 45, with close-cropped natural hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and a legal pad in front of her that was already half filled by the time I sat down. She'd asked me to send a summary before the meeting. I'd sent 11 pages. She looked up from the pad when I walked in. "You brought documentation," she said. "I brought everything," I said. She smiled. Not warmly exactly. More like a chess player recognizing a good opening move. "Then let's begin." I laid it out in order. That's the thing about spending years tracking every dollar in a notebook. You learn how to sequence information. You learn that the story only lands if the evidence lands first. I started with the shelter intake form. April 19th, 2015. My name, my age, my listed reason for placement. Minor removed from family home. Pregnancy-related family conflict. Signed by Miss Darlene Hutchins. Witnessed. Time-stamped. Then the Medicaid enrollment. My name, my address on Sycamore Drive. Active from June 2015. Then the WIC records. The transitional housing voucher. Eden's birth certificate listing me as sole guardian. Her pediatric records from Harwick Regional going back to her 6-week checkup. Then Georgia Piedmont enrollment. Then Georgia State. Then my current business registration in South Carolina. Carpenter Financial Consulting, LLC, filed March 2022. I was not a ghost. I was not unreachable. I was a paper trail 4 inches thick sitting on Caroline voters, church boards. And the probate fraud specifically, and I said, defrauding your own mother's estate. How does that read? It reads, Caroline said carefully, like someone who cannot be trusted. Then we go to trial, I said. March 14th, 2024. Franklin County Superior Court. I wore a charcoal gray suit and my hair down. I arrived at 8:30 a.m. Caroline was already there, legal pad ready, 3 accordion folders arranged in a specific order I'd learned never to disturb. My parents arrived at 8:52 a.m. My father looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. He was still broad-shouldered, still silver-templed, still carrying himself with that careful dignity. But something had compressed in him. He walked like a man expecting impact. My mother didn't look at me when she came in. That told me everything. Davis Pruitt presented their case first. The argument was essentially this. Gerald Carpenter had genuinely believed his daughter was unreachable based on years of no contact. The text message from Patricia was a private emotional communication, not evidence of locatability. The estate had been handled in good faith by the executor. It was a reasonable argument. Caroline dismantled it in 40 minutes. She entered the Medicaid records, the shelter documentation, the Georgia State enrollment, Eden's pediatric records listing my current address as of 2019, the same year my father told Paul Griggs I was unreachable. She entered the text message, time-stamped, from a phone on a family plan in my father's name. Then she called Paul Griggs to the stand. Paul Griggs was a deacon. He was not comfortable being in a courtroom testifying against another deacon. He answered Caroline's questions with the specific misery of a man who had trusted the wrong person and was only now understanding the full dimensions of that mistake. Mr. Griggs, Caroline said, when Gerald Carpenter told you his daughter was unreachable, did you conduct any independent search to verify that claim? I took his word, Griggs said quietly. He's a man of the church. I took his word. The room was very still. And if you had conducted an independent search, Caroline continued, would you have found her? He looked at the documentation on the table. Yes, he said it. It appears I would have. My father testified for 45 minutes. I watched him the way I had watched him in the deposition. Completely still, completely present, not giving him anything to read in my face. Near the end, Davis Pruitt asked him if he had anything to say directly about his relationship with his daughter. My father looked at me for the first time that day. I made decisions I thought were right at the time, he said. I know that's not enough. It wasn't a real apology. It was a sentence engineered to sound like one. I kept my face neutral. Caroline stood up. Mr. Carpenter, she said, when your daughter called your wife's phone in October 2018 to share her due date and hospital information, at that point, were you aware she was alive, living in Georgia, and enrolled at Georgia State University? A very long pause. Yes, he said. And 7 months later, when you told executor Paul Griggs she was unreachable despite reasonable effort, you knew all of that? Davis Pruitt started to object. The judge, the Honorable Sandra Mwangi, who had been taking notes consistently throughout the entire proceeding, raised one hand slightly without looking up. Pruitt sat back down. My father looked at his hands. Yes, he said. One word. That was all Caroline needed. Judge Sandra Mwangi delivered her ruling on March 28th, 2024. 14 days after the trial ended. 14 days during which I went to work every morning, made Eden's lunches, answered client emails, reviewed quarterly reports, and did not allow myself to sit in the anxiety of waiting. I had done everything I could do. The rest belonged to the court. Caroline called me at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday. I was at my desk reviewing a cash flow analysis for one of our hospital network clients. I saw her name on the screen, and I set down my pen and I picked up on the first ring. We won, she said. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside my office window, Charleston was doing what Charleston does in late March. Soft light, that particular low country warmth that arrives before you're quite ready for it. Everything just beginning to open up. Tell me, I said. Judge Mwangi's ruling was 31 pages. I've read it many times since. Not obsessively. More the way you return to a document that marks a before and after. The language of it is precise, legal, deliberately unemotional. But the findings are not. The court found that Gerald Carpenter had made materially false representations to executor Paul Griggs regarding the whereabouts and reachability of Noelle Carpenter. The court found that these representations were made knowingly, given documented evidence that Gerald Carpenter was aware of his daughter's location, enrollment status, and contact information at the time of the misrepresentation. The court found that Patricia Carpenter, through her own communication with the heir on October 14, 2018, had confirmed awareness of the heir's existence and contact information, and that her failure to correct her husband's misrepresentation to the executor constituted participation in the fraudulent concealment. The court ordered full restoration of Noelle Carpenter's inheritance, $64,340, plus accrued interest from date of death, totaling $68,940. The court further ordered Gerald and Patricia Carpenter to pay legal fees and court costs, totaling $22,400. Total awarded, $91,340. And then, the part that mattered more than the money, in ways I'm still untangling, the judgment was entered into the public record of Franklin County Superior Court, case number CVI-2023-4471, under the finding of civil fraud. My father's name attached to that word, permanently. I want to be honest about what happened next because I think people expect a certain kind of story here. They expect the villain to crumble publicly and completely. They expect the vindicated person to feel purely triumphant. It wasn't exactly like that. The judgment became public record on April 2nd, 2024. A journalist named Marcus Webb at the Franklin County Gazette picked it up 4 days later. A short piece, maybe 400 words, buried in the local court news section. Harwick Deacon and City Council member found liable for civil fraud in a state case. It wasn't front page, it wasn't a scandal piece. It was a court record item, factual and dry. But Harwick is a town of 6,000 people with a church on every corner. In a town like that, a dry court record item travels fast. Maya called me the following Sunday evening. "Your dad resigned from the deacon board," she said, "this morning, before the service." I absorbed that quietly. "And the council seat?" I asked. "He's not running for re-election in November," she said. "He announced it Friday. He said it was for personal reasons." I didn't respond right away. "Noelle," Maya said carefully, "your mom has been calling people, trying to explain the situation, saying it was a misunderstanding." "I know," I said. "Is there anything you want me to say if anyone asks me?" I thought about it for a moment. "Tell them the court record speaks for itself," I said. "That's all." My mother sent me a letter in May. Not a text, not an email, an actual letter, handwritten, on cream stationery with small blue flowers in the corner. The kind of stationery she'd always kept in the secretary desk in the living room. I remembered that desk. I used to do homework at it when I was small. I'm not going to reproduce the letter here because it belongs to me and I haven't decided what to do with it yet. What I will say is this. It was 4 pages long. It used the word sorry 11 times. It explained at length the fear and shame she had felt when I got pregnant, the pressure from the church community, the narrative that had gotten out of hand, the will which she characterized as a mistake she hadn't known how to undo. It asked for a chance to meet Eden. I read it twice. I folded it back along its original creases. I put it in a manila envelope and wrote the date on the outside in marker and put it in the file drawer where I keep documents I'm not ready to act on. I didn't respond. Not because I'm not going to. Maybe I will, someday, in some form. But because that decision deserves more than the momentum of their timeline. For 10 years, everything moved on their schedule. The eviction, the lie, the will, all of it timed to their convenience, their comfort, their reputation. This one moves on mine. The $91,340 hit my account on April 18th, 2024. I sat with that number for a long time. I thought about what to do with it. And I made a list, the way I've made lists since I was sitting at a library computer at 17 trying to figure out how to survive. Old habit, good habit. First, I set aside $30,000 in a custodial account in Eden's name at First National Bank of Charleston, earmarked for college. Starting balance, April 2024. Second, I donated $10,000 to the Harwick Women's Resource Center on Oleander Street, the shelter where Miss Darlene Hutchins had handed me a form and a cup of hot tea on April 19th, 2015. I included a letter. I told them what that intake form had meant, what it had started. They sent a handwritten thank you note from Miss Darlene herself. She's still there, still working, still handing cups of tea to frightened women who come through that door. Third, I invested $40,000 back into Carpenter Financial, a third office location I'd been delaying for 18 months. We opened in Columbia, South Carolina in September 2024, hired 3 new employees. 2 of them are women who were returning to the workforce after extended gaps. The remaining $11,340 I kept liquid. Because I grew up understanding that the distance between stability and disaster is thinner than most people want to believe, and I will never stop respecting that distance. Eden turned 9 in November 2024. She had a birthday party at a paint-your-own pottery studio. 8 friends, 3 hours, ceramic animals in every color that should not exist in nature. She painted a cat that was half purple and half gold and declared it perfect. Watching her in that room, loud and certain and completely at home in her own 9-year-old joy. I thought about the delivery room in 2015. Carol, the nurse, holding my hand. The way Eden screamed immediately, announcing herself. She's still like that, still announcing herself. Still certain she has the right to take up space. I don't know where she gets it. Maybe she built it herself. Or maybe she grew up watching someone build and absorbed the method without realizing it. There's one more thing I need to tell you. A few weeks after the judgment, I was driving Eden home from school. A Wednesday, I remember, because we always stop at the bakery on Wednesdays for one thing each, her rule. Established firmly at age 6 and non-negotiable. and she was quiet in the back seat in that specific way she gets when something is working through her. I glanced in the rearview mirror. You okay back there? Mommy, she said, do you have a grandma and grandpa? My hand stayed steady on the wheel. I do, I said carefully. How come I never met them? I'd prepared for this question in the abstract for years. In actual practice, in a car on a Wednesday with the bakery 2 blocks away, it landed differently than I'd prepared for. That's a complicated story, so I said, when you're a little older, I'll tell you the whole thing, I promise. She considered this seriously. Eden takes most things seriously when they matter to her. Were they mean to you? She asked. I thought about the porch, the suitcase I didn't pack, the yellow cardigan, the library computer, the shelter form at 4:52 p.m., the notebook, the years, all of it. They made some very bad choices, and I said, and I had to figure out how to be okay anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Then, but you are okay, right? I looked at her in the mirror. 9 years old, purple and gold ceramic cat on the shelf at home, completely certain I would answer correctly. Yeah, baby, I said. I really am. She nodded, satisfied, and looked back out the window. Good, she said. Can I get a croissant? I think about that girl on the porch sometimes. 17 years old, yellow cardigan, 58 degrees, suitcase she didn't pack, $214 and a prepaid card with 40 on it and a phone that was already going dead. I think about what she didn't know yet. She didn't know about Miss Darlene and the hot tea. She didn't know about Tanisha or Pam Okoye or Dr. Reeves saying you have a real mind for this. She didn't know about Eden screaming in a delivery room, announcing herself already at 30 seconds old. She didn't know about Caroline Osei and a legal pad and 31 pages of a judge's ruling. She didn't know about the gala, about standing at a podium in a camel coat while her mother stood 10 feet away and didn't recognize her. She didn't know any of it. All she knew was that the door was locked and the suitcase was there and the road ahead was completely dark. She picked it up anyway. She walked anyway. That's the whole story, really. That's everything else was just what happened because she didn't stop. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy. I moved past needing that a long time ago. I'm telling you this because somewhere, right now, there is someone standing on their own version of that porch. Different details, same locked door, and they're doing the math on whether they have enough money, enough support, enough strength to take the first step into the dark. You don't need enough for all of it. You just need enough for the next step. Miss Darlene taught me that without ever saying it directly. She just handed me a form and a cup of tea and pointed me toward the next thing. And the next thing after that existed because I did the first thing. That's how it works. That's how it always works. My name is Noelle Carpenter. I was kicked out at 17 with nothing. I am 27 years old with everything that matters. And the woman in the navy dress at a gala in Charleston, the one with the practiced smile and the pearl earrings and the youth outreach speeches, she didn't recognize me. That's not a tragedy. That's a victory.